Good evening, everybody, and welcome to The History Effect, which is an online series produced by the History Council of New South Wales. My name is Dr. Kiera Lindsey, and I am part of the History Council's Executive Council Committee, and I'm also a historian based at UTS. Tonight, I'm hosting the second in our mini-series on careers in history. And this is the mini-series where we talk with historians, with museum curators, with researchers, and all sorts of other history professionals about their passion for the past, so that we can ignite your passion for the past and help you and inspire you to find a conduit and opportunities for work. We talk to different people in different elements of the history profession to find out how they got started, how they got where they are now, and what happened along the way. So I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which the History Council has its offices, down at the Justice and Police Museum at Circular Quay in Sydney. I pay my respects to the Gadigal elders past, present and future. And I also pay my respects to the elders of Bidjigal country, which is where I am living and working myself right now. As I'm sure all of you are aware out there tonight, all of our careers are evolving and often unpredictable adventures. This year in particular has reminded us that our working lives are very often susceptible to all sorts of economic, political and social conditions, many of which are just simply out of our control. These days, the prospect of staying in one job is a thing of the past. Most of us will have about 4 or 5 professional reincarnations during our life. And in fact, that is a really good thing for us personally as well as professionally. It gives us an opportunity to get better and better at embracing technical innovations, at responding to market forces, and thinking about what exactly is needed and how we can be useful and how we can bring those skills to that moment. It also gets us to listen better to our gut instinct, to find out more about what we really want to do and how we can make a contribution. It also means that we're unlikely to end up where we started. But you have to start somewhere, right? And that's what we're talking about tonight. We're really lucky in tonight's series to talk to 2 people who we sort of identify as early career professionals. And we're going to tease out that term early career a little bit more in our talks and have a think about how they got there. So this is an invitation to you today on behalf of the History Council and our presenters to get inspired, to listen, and to be reminded of the benefit of being curious and open-minded, of becoming resourceful and taking risks, and hopefully having a lot of fun and even getting paid along the way. Tonight, we're very lucky to have with us Dr. Alinda Bierhuizen and Bonnie Wildie. They are 2 talented practitioners of the past, one a curator and the other archivist, both curious and creative with lots of interesting experiences. Our first speaker is going to be Alinda. She is a Dutch public historian who lives and works in Sydney now. She's the social history curator at the Fairfield City Museum and Gallery, a member of the Professional Historians Association in both New South Wales and ACT, and on the executive committee. And she started working in Australia as a freelance historian, conducting research on behalf of the New South Wales State Archives and a heritage interpretation firm. In the Netherlands, Alinda worked as a curator at the Amsterdam City Archives for several years. She has a Bachelor of Arts in History and Masters of Arts in Public History, both of which were attained at the University of Amsterdam. Wow, it's going to be great to talk to you, Alinda, so I'm handing it over to you.
I would also like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the land on which I live and present to you from tonight, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And yeah, thanks Kiera for that introduction. Not quite a doctor, just Alinda at this stage in my career. fun fact that I was actually an attendee at this exact event 2 years ago, when Kiera was one of the speakers and a few other people who I have since gotten to know better. And I think for me, this event actually marked sort of the start of my career in history in Australia. So I can personally say that it gave me a little push, and it's really helped me to find my feet. As mentioned, I grew up and studied in the Netherlands. I'm Dutch, completed my university degrees in Amsterdam. But I think it's interesting to first tell you a little bit about how I got into history, although I do find that a very difficult question, because I think I've always liked history. I've always been interested in the past. I've always loved reading historic novels. I've always, you know, fantasized about time travel, really had a big obsession with the 60s, wanted to be a hippie, loved Jim Morrison. So history has always been a part of my life. And I think I also am a very social person. I like talking to people. I like learning people's stories. And once I realized that that is what history is all about, yeah, it was pretty obvious for me that this was the way to go. So after studying, my first real history job was at the Amsterdam City Archives. It's a beautiful sort of 1920s building in Amsterdam on one of the canals. And this is where the city archives are kept. So Netherlands has a very long tradition of archiving their past. It's a massive archive, over 50 kilometers long, with a great collection of not just documents, but also photographs, maps, drawings, paintings, objects, an archaeological collection, etc. Very oldest sort of collection item dates back to the 13th century, which is pretty exciting. And I was a member of the curatorial team. So it was quite a big organization. And as a member of the curatorial team, we worked on the exhibitions. So I learned about exhibition concepts, about exhibition design. I wrote texts, I did research, but also gave public talks, and yeah, really learned the ins and outs of exhibition making, which is great. And I think here my work was already a mix between more traditional historical research, as well as the more creative side of curating, which I really like. And even though I don't work in archives anymore, I do still really like archives. I always try to visit them, and I find them incredibly fascinating places, because there's a real sense of there's always so much more to discover. You never know what you're going to find. And one thing that I really took away from working there is that an archive and the collection of an archive can allow you to tell a big historical narrative on a human level. We can put faces and names to stories and make it personal. And I think that is a really strong sort of aspect of archives. So one of the exhibitions that I worked on was called Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, however you want to pronounce it, but it is Van Gogh, and the 400 days that he spent in Amsterdam. So not many days, but it was a really interesting exhibition, because what we started with were letters. Van Gogh was a great writer, and he wrote all his life to his brother Theo. And the time that he spent in Amsterdam, he was not actually an artist yet, but he was a frustrated student and thought he wanted to become a reverend in the church. So we started with the premise of this famous painter, but we wanted to make an exhibition about a time of his life where he was not a painter, he didn't paint anything, and he was a frustrated student trying to make sense of the world. But the letters were great, and we really tried to interpret them through not just an audio guide, but also kind of the way he described the city, went on a lot of walks, met people, yeah, find objects and find artworks that were relevant to those stories, and that way kind of tell his stories and show the Amsterdam of Van Gogh. I finished working there because I decided to move to Australia. Not necessarily because of the great career perspectives in history, but for love. So yeah, I came to Australia and basically had to start from scratch again. I didn't have a professional network. I didn't go to university here. I didn't even really feel like I knew that much about Australian history. So it was a bit of a challenge. But what I did realize was that sort of the fundamental skills that I learned through my training at university, you know, they were still there. I could take them with me and apply them in a different country. So that's one of the things I really want to share with people tonight. Have confidence in the skills that you've been taught and that you've learned at university. So doing research, being able to write, your historical knowledge, your communication skills, critical thinking, you know, it's very valuable. So I kind of had to come up with a plan of attack on, you know, how to get a career in history in a new country. And one of the things that I did is I went to the State Library. I attended a lot of seminars, kind of figuring out what resources there are available to researchers here. I spent days on Trove. I read a lot of books, visited every exhibition on display. It did help that I had a lot of free time at this stage because my visa prevented me from actually working. But I was basically a sponge and I was just trying to absorb as much as I could from the history field, which gave me enough confidence to then start thinking about building a network. And I sent an email to someone I knew through someone back in the Netherlands and basically just said, I'm here, I need help. Do you want to meet for a coffee? And it worked. That person sort of became a mentor and pushed me in the right directions and made me meet the right people and showed me that it's okay to ask for help and kind of, you know, be guided and you don't have to figure it all out on your own. So one of the first things I did, as I've said a few times now, was attend this Careers in History event, which at the time was still face-to-face. And there was actually networking possible afterwards. So I did my research, saw who the speakers were, thought I should really talk to that person and that person. So I did the same thing again, just approached people and said, hi, I'm Alinda, I'm new here, can you help me? And again, it worked. They told me about the PHA, the Professional Historians Association, which I then joined. And I'll definitely encourage those of you who have studied history or want to work in the field to join an association like the PHA. Because yeah, it gives you great connections. And I also joined the committee, which has really helped me to understand the field even better. But yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid to contact people, go and meet people for coffees. Historians are very friendly, I found, both here and overseas. So yeah, don't be afraid. I also did a lot of volunteering. Volunteering is hard sometimes because you don't get paid and we do need money, but it does give you the opportunity to try new things, to experiment, to see if something works for you, if you really are interested in something that you think you're interested in. So yeah, all of this networking, if you will, gave me the confidence to then start on some freelance working. And it was, again, not great from the start. I still had to do other work on the side, but at least I was doing history in some form of shape. So it was good. And then I guess I ended up where I am now. So I found my current job, which I applied for as a temporary part-time position in a part of Sydney I had never heard of or had never even been. But I got the job and I work there full-time now on a permanent contract. And I'd say it's pretty close to perfect for me at this stage in my life and in my career. I'm very happy. And what attracted me in the role and what I still enjoy very much is the focus on migrant heritage and on community engagement. It's a very grassroots place, unique. It's pretty authentic, if you will. And that is something that I was really looking for and something that I struggled with at the City Archives in Amsterdam, which was a very big government-run organization, very white, really operating within a Western framework. And I found that there was a lot of tension between what we were trying to achieve there, which was not just documenting, but also representing, I think, the city of Amsterdam and its people, but really trying to achieve that sort of inclusivity and being a reflection of the people that you serve in a way was often very hard. We found it hard to connect with certain communities. And yeah, that's something that I'm interested in. And I think in my current job, I have a lot more opportunity to explore those questions and to find out how to do that and how to engage as many people as possible with history and heritage. So my official title is Social History and Exhibition Curator, which is pretty long. So I just call myself the curator, and I'm basically responsible for the exhibitions and the object collection. So we have different kinds of exhibitions. We have quite traditional social history exhibitions about the local Fairfield area. We currently have Fairfield's finest drop on display about the long history of winemaking in the area, which is linked to a lot of the Italian and German migrants coming in. And it also features a lot of locals that still make wine, which is really great. We had a wine festival when we launched, so come and see it. We're open again. But we also try to, as I said before, really work with the local community. So some of the projects that we do, we actively, well, most of the projects that we do, we actively ask people to contribute, whether it's through their stories or objects or events that we host. So Treasures from Home was another social history exhibition that we did, where we asked people to speak about objects that they brought with them when migrating or coming to Australia as a refugee, and how that kind of told their story and what it meant to them, to reflect back on that. So we used oral histories to capture those stories as well, and that was a great project. I also do contemporary art exhibitions now, which was completely new territory for me. I did a bit of art history at uni, but definitely don't consider myself an art curator. So I'm learning every day, and it's really fun. And that brings me to another point, to, I think, really be creative and flexible, because a lot of jobs in history outside academia require a lot of both. So be prepared to do more than research and writing, and get away from your computer screen or the library sometimes and try new things. I think, yeah, it's good to think about that question. What does it actually mean to do history outside the academic realm, or yeah, not within that sector, but within the GLAM sector, which I really like that you say that here in Australia, the galleries, libraries, archives and museums. But yeah, what does that mean for me? Less footnotes, which I personally don't mind. But I guess what I mean, it's a different audience. So you're not researching for the sake of research, and you're being held accountable in different ways. So first and foremost, my audience is the local community of Fairfield, and not my peers or an academic community. And what I do at work, what I present through the exhibitions and the public programs, it needs to be relevant to the local community, which to me is very exciting. What else do I do at work? A lot of paperwork. I do work for local government, so a lot of paperwork. I project manage, I apply for grant funding, manage budgets, organize events, work on public programs. I deliver talks, tours, answer inquiries, and responsible for the object collection. So it's a lot, but at this point in my career, it, I think, is a really good fit for me. And that brings me to my last slide, which are just some tips from my perspective. So as I said before, understand and appreciate the value of your training and skill set. Don't undervalue what you've learned and what you can do. Experience matters, so take on internships, do volunteering, network, socialize, say yes and be open to new ideas and opportunities. Also collaborate and be creative. Don't think that to have a career in history, you need to work with necessarily historians. I'm the only historian in my team, yet I do have a career in history. And I think something that I learned along the way is apply for jobs you want and apply for them even if they seem out of reach. Keep in mind that people writing job ads ask for the impossible person, and it's really almost always the case that they're not going to find that impossible person. So you might be the closest thing to what they're looking for exactly. And yeah, keep reading, keep learning. And I think I'd like to finish by saying that for me, a career in history is really a social career. It's about people in the past, the way we make sense of it today. It is social in that everyone, you know, participates in one way or another. And I think everyone should participate in the way that we do history, we make history. And I think that a successful path to that career is also to be social. Like I've said, attend events like these, talk to people, and share your own stories, just like I did tonight. And who knows, in a few years' time, you might be sitting in my chair and presenting at another Careers in History event. Thank you.
Thanks, Alinda. That's wonderful. I'm going to focus on the questions that I think are going to be most helpful to the careers. So, but before I did that, I just wanted to take a pause and take stock of some of the incredibly useful comments that you made. I think just in sharing your story, you know, I've worked with a couple of recruitment agencies in my long and jaded life, and you talked about networking and combining networking and seeing networking as a researching and relationship building process, that you basically, you know, dropped out of the sky here and said, okay, how do I get started? And you did some basic research to start to get a sense of the lie of the land. And then you started to go to anything that you could, that you thought might be relevant, to start to hone your interest, to get more information. And then you started to build relationships, that some of which turned into mentors. And I know in recruiting, they often say, find some people who, you know, write down everybody who you think could be interested in your field, who might be relevant, and contact them and ask them if you can take them out for a coffee and just spend 5 to 10 minutes with them to pick their brains for some ideas. And that is basically what you did. So you're obviously brilliant at, you know, self-recruiting for yourself. I thought that was fantastic. So you got to know the context and you drew on your training that you already had. And as you said, you kept reminding yourself to value that and to use it and to apply it in different contexts. All the time you're learning, you then made commitments to two things, which I think are very useful for people out there in Zoom land. And one is you committed yourself to associational life. You said, I'm going to join these associations and start to learn about how the systems and the networks work more generally, what the, if you like, the topography of the whole history world is. And then you also said, and I'm going to invest also. So before you got anything, you made investments. You made investments in these associations and you made investments in these volunteering. And it seems like the volunteering was something that helped you work out what you were interested in and also what you weren't interested in. Do you want to comment on that a little bit more, Alinda?
Yeah, I think one thing that became pretty clear to me. So I did some volunteering for Sydney Living Museums, which I do find a really interesting organisation, and you know, perhaps I'd ever like to work for them in the future. But the work that I did for them was mainly tour guiding, which I had done a lot during my studies in Amsterdam, and even as a curator at the Amsterdam City Archives, I still did it a bit, and I thought that would be sort of an easy way to get into the history field. But I think I realized pretty quickly that I wanted more than that, and that I really wanted to push myself to kind of get beyond that stage of tour guiding. So that was really helpful for me. I also explored some completely different things through volunteering. So for example, I volunteered through Harvest, which is a food rescue organization, because that's something else I'm really interested in and passionate about. But even though that was fun, I realized I did not want to work in a place like that, and that I really did want to pursue that history career. So yeah.
And it does sound like you kind of gave yourself a period of time to experiment and explore, to find out and to refine.
Yeah, and even through some of the work that I did, because you know, you have to be realistic and earn money as well. yeah, there were some of the things that I did as a freelance historian that I didn't necessarily enjoy that much. Some of the more research heavy, writing long, lengthy texts. I found it comfortable because it's something that I knew how to do. But at the same time, I realized that I didn't want to be sitting in my bedroom as I'm sitting now by myself for days on end, staring at a computer screen and writing a long piece of work for a few people. No one was going to read it. Yeah, that I really wanted to make a little bit more of an impact and have a bit more of an audience for what I did.
Yeah, and what really shines through your comments also is the focus that you place on relationships, that you see history as a social activity in many ways, and that's your focus is on people and authenticity as well. You also put a great focus on audience in I think your presentation as well, which I thought might be a useful thing for people to consider in their careers, is to whom do they want to connect and how?
Yeah, and I think it ties in with the idea that history is so much more than what we're used to think about it in an academic sense. You know, there's historians that do all sorts of great things, that make podcasts, that make documentaries, that write historic novels, that create websites. It's a really broad spectrum of things that you can do and should do, I think, because the way we consume history has also moved away from just the written form. And I think it allows for a much broader audience to experience and engage in history, which is very valuable.
Thank you. I've just been looking through the questions.
I saw that.
Deborah has asked about budgets and grant writing applications and things like that, and how you acquired those skills. Is that something that you took training courses for, or did you learn a lot of that on the job, in the run?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, again, being realistic. If you work in the cultural sector, there is always a lack of funding. Doesn't matter how big or small the organization you work for, it's always understaffed, low on resources, low on budget. So you have to be creative in where you do get your money from. And grant writing is definitely something that you can learn and get better at, and learn as you go. But I do think that, you know, generally having good writing skills helps in your applications and to strengthen them. And as well, having an understanding of, as you called it, the topography of the field. So knowing where the money can come from really helps. And networking, understanding what people are on the board, what people decide on, who gets what money, really helps you in kind of pinpointing the right funds to write for.
One of the most resonant comments, I think you made many resonant comments, but the one that's really sitting with me at the moment is don't be afraid to ask for help. I think you said that about 3 times. And I think that's very important for people to hear out there, that, you know, historians do tend to be friendly, are interested and curious in one another, and like to see history flourish. And so asking for help is not a bad thing. Have you learnt different ways of asking, or are you pretty straight up and just, you sounded like you did a bit of research and worked out who you wanted to ask to help how?
Yeah, it's definitely not, it's something you get better at as well. I mean, the first time you go to an event where you don't know anyone, it's really easy to just cling on to your glass of wine or beer and stand in a corner. But you do just have to step up to people and say, look, this is me, who are you? Let's talk. But what I found helpful was if I knew where I was going, to actually Google the people, and just to make a little list of people that I would like to talk to because they work in a field that I'm interested in, or they've done things that I find interesting, so that you know who they are and what you want to talk to them about.
Yeah, so use those research skills, right? And, so how, I mean, I've got 2 questions I want to ask you. One is just to reflect on what it means to be in an early career stage. You know, what would you define this as for yourself? And how does it feel?
I think it's pretty exciting because there is, in a way, less pressure. It's like being young, you know, you can get away with things. I think it's easier to, again, to ask for help if you're younger, because people, you know, don't judge as much, maybe, or at least that's how you feel. And yeah, it really gives you the space and the time to think about what you're doing, why it is that you like what you're doing, or why not. And you know that you can make a career change if you want to, and explore different paths and avenues. And as you work, you learn and you discover your strengths and you acquire new skills. And yeah, I can really feel myself growing. And I think I've, yeah, that's a really good feeling.
And it sounds like you've made some key discoveries about what you're less interested in and what you're more interested in. And one of those was the recognition that you wanted to be working in an environment that was dealing, which was away from the Western paradigm, that was more grassroots, more authentic was the word that you used. And so that now that you've refined your interests down, you can go deeper into those. And that might be quite a significant way of thinking about an early career historian, is that they're starting to sculpt their future.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, history is really not just studying the past, it's just as much studying the way that we engage with the past, or the way that we make sense of the past in the present, which is a phrase very commonly used in public history. But I think for me, that is the essence of what I find interesting about history.
Well, you kind of answered my next question, but I think you might have something else for me, which is I wanted to ask you the question, which is the theme question for the History Council as we head into History Week this year, which is history. What is it good for? What have you got?
I really like the theme for History Week. I think it's great. I think history is so relevant because of what I said previously. It's not just the past that exists there in a separate world. History is being made now. It's being constantly reshaped, and it really depends on the focus or the nuances that we kind of implement now, and that determines the way that we create the past. And exactly because of that, history is always relevant.